The Night Witches is a show that takes place on July 1st, 1943. There were 3 air bomber regiments made of women. Marina Raskova made 3 regiments. There was the 586th, 587th, and the 588th, and they all contained women. But the 588th was exclusively women, and that is our regiment in the show.
They bombed the Germans in the middle of the night. They actually got the nickname Night Witches because the Germans would yell out Nachthexen, which is night witches in German, when they flew over them, because the sound of the wind going through their wings sounded like a witch on her broom.
It follows these women on one specific night. That did happen in real life during World War II, where the Germans tried a new tactic to fight these women.
They couldn't believe that just women could possibly be able to wreak such havoc on them, so they're like, there's got to be something else going on. They've got to be witches or something. And then the women claimed that name as their own and started kind of referring to themselves as that in like an empowering way.
I like the name for the story because like you hear the name and you're kind of like, oh, what's that about? It's like it almost has a negative connotation to it, which is originally how it was intended. Like when Germany named them that, they meant it to be a negative thing, but they kind of took it and ran with it and made it a positive thing. They almost don't think we're human because we're able to do these things and we don't back down and we still hit our target even if there's gunfire around us and things like that.
Some shows you aren't able to do a lot of research about. Some shows, especially if they're new ones, you kind of make up a lot of it, or you make up a lot of your character, or you can watch a Broadway of the characters being played before. But with Night Witches, there is real historical research that we have been doing as a cast and crew to learn about the show and learn about these women, but also research on these women in general, how they lived their everyday lives, what they went through, what their experience was, since it is real. And so being able to tell a truth in that way is absolutely incredible, and it makes it all the more important that we get it right and we get it so that it's historically accurate.
It's a show about camaraderie, about sisterhood, and about how you can find light even in the most unimaginable darkness possible. And it's a heavy show, but there's so much good in it, there's so much light in it, and it's a really great story that needs to be told.
The show takes course over the whole night, and you get to see a lot of hard, but you also see a lot of joy, and that's what our director Jennifer has been telling us to focus on, and I think that's really helpful for the show as a whole, but also for us as actors, because it can be really draining to work on a hard show. But finding those moments of joy and of camaraderie that the women actually had back during World War II is something that's been really fun to discover.
The characters in The Night Witches, they are fictional, like they're not real people, but a lot of the things that they say are based off of real members of the Night Witches. There's a book that the play was partially based off of, and reading through the book you can see a couple segments that have a lot of similarities. So like one character, Martha, has like a monologue that she gives towards the end of the show, and in the book that the play is partially based on, there is another woman who had a very similar experience. So the characters themselves and kind of their personalities are fictional, but their experiences are lifted from true stories.
We actually listened to a podcast of actual Night Witches, and a lot of what was said in this podcast is actually in the script and written in there. It's so incredible to be in these women's shoes, thinking these women dropped everything so they could go fight in a war, and yet they still were women. They still wanted to curl their hair, they still wanted to look good, they still wanted to joke around and laugh and dance and play, yet they still flew in planes and dropped bombs on the Germans. And it just blows my mind how even though they lose friends, they go through so much pain, they still get up and do it again, over and over and over again. And in this show that happens, like, they keep getting up, they keep getting back up and keep flying. And I think that's incredible to think about when playing these really strong women, because I don't know if I would ever be strong enough to go fight in a war. It's a terrifying thought, but these women did it, and it's incredible to be able, and I'm honored to play one of them.
All of us kind of approached it with definitely not saying we don't approach all of the shows with a lot of seriousness and dedication, but this one had the added weight of like, these are real, not real people, but they're all based off of real people, and it's real events that are happening. One of the things I say at the very end of the show, I recount the events of what happened during that night, the night the show takes place. We're recounting a night where 8 women lost their lives, so there's a lot of seriousness, and while we do have fun in rehearsals, I think we also are approaching this one with a lot more sincerity and like seriousness and respect for these women, because they were real.
These women that we are portraying were our age and actually younger. These women were 15 to 24 years old when they did this, when they sacrificed their lives. And so that's the higher end of that is our ages now. And they were all very close and went through this together. And as a cast, we all get to be very close and we get to put on this show together. So I really hope the audience feels the truth behind the friendship and the truth behind the love, since it feels real to us as well.
Something that I've like discovered as I navigate like my relationship with theater and how much I love it is I just love, like I adore shows that are based in history, whether it's loosely based or based on one person. There's just something special about it, not only because as an actor there's almost more pressure to tell that story in a way that's respectful and done well, but also just like the world is so much better for it. Like the audiences learn and they discuss it. I never heard of these women before.
Portraying a real person instead of a character is it's a very different challenge from just like getting a character that was made up by a writer. Having like real stories to build off of, it helps a lot in being able to build the world that these women lived in. And at me as an actor, knowing these things happened makes me feel the events of the play even deeper, and it just kind of hits me in my core. And it's kind of what I love about theater, is that everything can make you feel so much in this small theater space.
It's very heartfelt, and I feel like having a strong cast of a bunch of women, it's all women, just having all of us working together to put together this show is just something that I haven't seen here yet.
This one, it's so intentionally all female because so many like war stories especially happen to revolve around men, because it was usually men fighting because women weren't allowed to. Whereas this one is highlighting the stories of these women because for so long they weren't told.
Being in a room full of women and performing with these women and mirroring that camaraderie that the actual girls had has been something that's really fun to discover. And I think that girlhood and that womanhood remains very strong. And I think the playwright intended it that way as well.
I think this show is just very, the way that the set is done, especially with the plane, is very different from a lot of things that have been done at Northwestern. So rather than being strictly looking exactly like a plane, it's made up with the bodies of all of us, like making the plane, and that gives it a very different feeling. I think it makes it a lot more like intimate and a lot more realistic, but in a different way. Like it definitely has a different feeling to it, and almost like a dreamlike quality in some parts with the women forming the plane, and then there's other spots too with just the way that the blocking is done that gives it a very different feeling from a lot of Northwestern shows.
What makes this show stand out is even though it is a very realistic show and has real events being portrayed, there are elements of like, it's very dramatized because it is real things, but it's also theater. So because of that, when we're portraying these big things like a plane flying and explosions, spoiler alert, but portraying these real things like planes flying and women reliving their memories of childhood, you can expand upon it in a way that doesn't happen in real life and kind of fills in the gaps, I suppose. It really paints the picture for the audience and brings them into the world.
Most of the like areas of where we have to use our team bonding is during the plane scenes and the crashes, especially because we're all working together to put together this plane and act like it's up in the sky when we're still on the ground. and we're moving with each other, we're turning, we're going up, we're going down, and then exploding. We're bringing the pilot and the navigator out in these ways that portrays what we would imagine a plane like looking like when it explodes, and just trying to bring the deaths to life, because there was a lot of women who lost their lives that night.
We use a lot of physicality throughout the show to help portray the scene. So, for example, there is a moment in my personal monologue that I say where I talk about flying. And a lot of us have moments like that when we talk about flying, where we kind of become a plane and we put our arms out and we show like the plane flying. Another character, Alexandra, she has a part where she talks about remembering back home, sitting at the table, and one of the other characters kind of goes down and she sits on her feet and sits there like she's eating at the table and things like that. So it's really cool.
So my character, Alexandra, is a navigator in the bombing regiment, and my pilot, Irina, played by one of my best friends, Abby. Me and her get to fly together. Alexandra is very much more upbeat and tries to keep positive and thinks to the future, wishing to go home, and also just tries to keep everyone's spirits lifted, even though they're in this dark, dismal war, and they're having to risk their lives every single night. And I think there's just this really beautiful sisterhood that she has with her pilot and with all the other characters in the show, and I think that's really special.
We got these scripts at the beginning of the summer, at the end of last year. And we got to look them over the summer, we got to memorize our lines over the summer. But it's so hard to memorize and to put in that work when you don't have all the other aspects of the show. So being back, getting the blocking, saying your lines with other people. We've done costumes, we've got our set, all the crew's been working really, really hard in that way. So we have a lot of those elements back in, and that has been absolutely amazing. It is so much fun to be able to go through the script with all that incorporated.
I was given pretty much free rein to come up with some different ideas for composing music for the show, and it was really fun to just like explore a couple different genres. I did like a choral theme, I did a big orchestral theme, and I did a string orchestra, and then I was thinking about it and I was like, one of my favorite string quartets is actually by a Russian guy, Shostakovich. I believe it's string quartet number 8, movement 2. It's just this really intense, really fun string quartet. It's like, maybe I can do string quartet theme and see how that sounds. But yeah, it's been really fun to kind of get into this part of the show. I've never been on crew for Northwestern Theater before, so it's fun to get on this side of it and to compose music. I'm a music composition major, so it's fun to use my skills that I'm learning here at Northwestern for something like this. I've never done this before, so it was really fun.
I basically find all the props for the show, so I've taken lots of trips and found many props. I've also made some my own. I also had the unique experience where I got to teach people to embroider in the cast, so a lot of the handkerchiefs and embroidery in this show are actually made by my fellow cast members, which is really, really cool. Pulling out history wherever I can, and that's been amazing.
Elena did a lot of the work over the summer of getting like the list ready to go of everything that we need, so huge props to her. She did so much before I even got here. But basically at the beginning of rehearsal, we'll just chat quick about what needs to be done, and then I go head off to the costume shop or back where we keep our props. There's a couple of things we've gone over to our storage facility and gotten, but a lot of it is, just making things by hand.
As a dramaturg, I've had to answer questions and be pushed to research more, and just trying to find things that you can't just find with a Google search, and like researching more. So that's been a fun challenge and interesting and really exciting to dive into.
Our dramaturg, Sophia, who's also in the cast, she had this wonderful presentation about the history and sort of the everyday life of these women, and that just made it so much more real. It's a very big honor to be able to portray women that existed and went through these real things, and that almost makes it even more real for us, having these be actual events that women went through.
It was really exciting to learn about these women who were so underappreciated, but just as important to help it win for the Allies and their motherland in World War II. I believe the heart behind this story is these women putting their lives on the line, risking everything just to fight for what they believe is right, which kind of makes me think of how Christianity is really. Christians are striving to set a godly example of who God is and what He is. He loves us, and we want to set that example for those who don't know who He is.
I hope that when audiences come and see The Night Witches, I want them to be moved and I want them to learn about these women. And that's first and foremost, like spreading that history and telling their stories, especially since they can't anymore. But then, yeah, secondary to that, seeing Christ and seeing that light, because He does bring light to a very dark world, and these were very dark times. So hopefully we can show that little spark of joy and of hope and of light that He brings.
I never realized how dark the war was in the Soviet Union, but it was just really terrible, and like there were atrocities on both sides and just so much suffering. And it was really impactful for me then with looking at these little moments of hope and joy and being able to see those times of goodness, even though it was overall just such a horrible and devastating time.